Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy is perhaps one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, and for a chilling reason. Bundy wasn't the monster people expected. With his clean-cut looks and charismatic personality, he didn't fit the typical profile of a killer. He was the charming stranger who could easily gain anyone's trust, which made his crimes all the more horrifying. In the 1970s, Bundy confessed to the murders of 30 young women across several states, although it's believed the actual number could be much higher. His ability to blend into society while committing such brutal acts has kept people fascinated for decades. He often lured his victims with tricks, pretending to be injured or posing as an authority figure, before overpowering them. Bundy's crimes were marked by their sheer brutality. After abducting his victims, he would sexually assault them before beating them to death. Some of his victims were even decapitated, with Bundy keeping their heads as grotesque trophies. Despite his monstrous actions, Bundy represented himself in court, turning his trial into a media spectacle. The public was captivated, horrified, and somehow intrigued by his intelligence and audacity. Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair in 1989, but his story lives on as a chilling reminder of how deceptive appearances can be. He's a figure that continues to haunt the American psyche, embodying the darkest capabilities hidden behind a seemingly normal facade. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, is one of the most disturbing figures in criminal history. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys in a series of crimes that shocked the world. Unlike many other serial killers, Dahmer's actions went beyond murder. His crimes included necrophilia, cannibalism, and the gruesome preservation of body parts. Dahmer's killing spree began in his late teens, and his method was methodical and horrifying. He would lure young men to his home with the promise of money or companionship, then drug them, strangle them, and engage in unspeakable acts with their corpses. Dahmer's apartment, when discovered by the police, was a house of horrors, filled with dismembered body parts, photographs of his crimes, and even human remains preserved in chemicals. The details of Dahmer's crimes horrified the public and painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual. During his trial, he confessed to his murders in detail, displaying a chilling lack of emotion. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. In 1994, Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate, but his gruesome legacy lives on, a reminder of the darkest depths of human depravity. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, was a serial killer who terrorized Chicago in the 1970s. By day, Gacy was a respected community member, known for performing at children's parties as Pogo the Clown. But by night, he was a predator who lured young boys and men to his home, where he would rape, torture, and ultimately murder them. Gacy's crimes were as horrifying as they were numerous. He killed at least 33 young men, burying most of their bodies in the crawl space under his house. His ability to lead a double life, charming clown by day, sadistic killer by night, added to the terror of his crimes. Gacy often lured his victims with promises of construction work or by posing as a police officer, exploiting their trust before trapping them. His capture came when a young boy went missing, leading the police to Gacy's home. The investigation uncovered the grim reality hidden beneath his house. Gacy was convicted of his crimes and sentenced to death, spending 14 years on death row before being executed by lethal injection in 1994. John Wayne Gacy remains a figure of macabre fascination, a stark example of how evil can hide behind a mask of normalcy. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos, often described as the first female serial killer, shocked America with her violent crimes in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Unlike many male serial killers who sought power or control, Wuornos' story was one of survival turned deadly. A sex worker who spent much of her life on the margins of society, Wuornos claimed to have killed 7 men in Florida in self-defense, stating they had either raped or attempted to rape her. Wuornos' case was controversial. She insisted that her actions were a result of her traumatic life experiences, including abuse and exploitation, which pushed her to a breaking point. Her story highlighted the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator, sparking debates on mental health, justice, and the death penalty. She was convicted of 6 murders and executed in 2002, becoming a complex figure in the narrative of American crime. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, terrorized Southern California in the mid-1980s with a series of brutal murders, sexual assaults, and burglaries. His crimes were marked by extreme violence and bizarre satanic rituals, which he often performed at the crime scenes. Ramirez's ability to elude capture for so long and his unpredictable nature left the public in a state of fear. His capture was dramatic. After his face was broadcast on television, he was recognized by residents who beat him up until police arrived. During his trial, Ramirez displayed a chilling lack of remorse, flashing a pentagram he had drawn on his hand and declaring his allegiance to Satan. He was sentenced to death in 1989 but died in prison in 2013. Richard Ramirez's legacy is one of terror, his crimes reflecting the darkest parts of human nature. Ed Gein. Ed Gein may not have been the most prolific killer, but his crimes have become some of the most infamous due to their sheer bizarre nature. Gein, a reclusive farmer from Wisconsin, was convicted of 2 murders in the 1950s, but it was what he did with the bodies that shocked the world. Gein exhumed corpses from local graveyards, using their skin and bones to fashion gruesome trophies and keepsakes. His home, when discovered by authorities, was filled with grotesque items made from human remains, including lampshades and furniture. Gein's crimes inspired numerous fictional killers in pop culture, such as Norman Bates in Psycho and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Though Gein spent the rest of his life in a mental institution, his story remains a haunting example of how twisted the human mind can become. Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, is one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. Over several decades, Ridgway targeted young women, many of whom were runaways or sex workers, and murdered them. He was methodical in his approach, often strangling his victims and disposing of their bodies in remote areas around the Green River in Washington state. Ridgway's ability to evade capture for so long. He wasn't arrested until 2001, nearly 20 years after his first murder, was a testament to his cunning nature. After his arrest, he confessed to killing 71 women, although he was only convicted of 49. Ridgway's chilling lack of remorse and his calculated approach to killing make him one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Charles Manson. Charles Manson wasn't a serial killer in the traditional sense, but was instead the charismatic leader of the Manson family, a cult that committed a series of brutal murders in 1969. Manson convinced his followers that he was a messianic figure and manipulated them into committing murder. The most infamous of these was the killing of actress Sharon Tate and several others in her home. Manson's influence over his followers was terrifying, showing the power of manipulation and control. He was sentenced to life in prison for his role in orchestrating the murders and remained a notorious figure until his death in 2017. Manson's name has since become synonymous with the dangers of cults and the dark side of charismatic leadership. David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, terrorized New York City in the late 1970s with a series of shootings that left 6 people dead and 7 others wounded. Berkowitz claimed that a demon, which spoke through his neighbor's dog, commanded him to commit the murders. This bizarre claim, along with his taunting letters to the police and media, captured public attention and fueled a citywide panic. Berkowitz was eventually caught in 1977 and sentenced to life in prison, where he later claimed to have found religion. His case remains a stark reminder of how mental illness can manifest in terrifying ways and the fear that a single individual can instill in a city. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper, a name that echoes through the dark alleys of history, sending shivers down the spine. In the fall of 1888, this mysterious figure emerged in the foggy streets of London's Whitechapel district, brutally murdering 5 women in a series of horrific crimes that have never been solved. The victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were all vulnerable women working as sex workers in the poorest parts of London. Jack's modus operandi was both brutal and chilling. He would slash their throats and mutilate their bodies in gruesome ways, suggesting a possible familiarity with anatomy. Despite a massive manhunt and countless theories, the police never caught Jack the Ripper. He seemed to vanish as quickly as he appeared, leaving behind only a trail of terror and speculation. Over the years, suspects have ranged from local butchers to high-ranking members of society, yet none were ever conclusively identified as the killer. The media frenzy at the time only fueled the mystery. Newspapers sensationalized the murders, and the name Jack the Ripper came from a taunting letter sent to the press, supposedly by the killer himself. Whether this letter was genuine or a hoax, it cemented the Ripper's place as a figure of fear and fascination. More than 130 years later, Jack the Ripper's identity remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history. Modern forensic techniques and DNA testing have been applied, but the case remains cold, with each new theory adding more intrigue rather than answers. Jack the Ripper's story is more than just a tale of a killer. It's a symbol of the unknown and the unknowable, a haunting reminder of the dark corners of human history that may never fully come to light.